The only way to progress crypto, I think, is to relentlessly focus on founders and startups. And when you have an industry that hasn't found too much PMF in, other than stablecoins, then you're going to need is sort of like a Manhattan Project or like a virtual Silicon Valley, where you have people experimenting with no barriers and no real time limit to just do shit, experiment with shit and see what comes out.
And that's why you're turning the UAE into the Silicon Valley of crypto, famously.
Oh yeah, that's hopefully we can do that. I'd like to make Solana that, and then hopefully Solana hub in UAE.
This episode is brought to you by Chaos Labs, one of the leading on-chain risk management firms. You'll be hearing more from them later in the show. This episode is brought to you by Renaud Partners, the premier go-to-market advisory firm for early-stage crypto teams. Thanks to them for making this episode possible. This episode is brought to you by Ledger, the most secure hardware wallet trusted by 7 million users and securing 20% of the world's digital assets. We'll be hearing more from them later in the show. Hey Lightspeed listeners, we need your help. Lightspeed is conducting an audience survey to help us get a better picture of who our listeners are and what you want to see from the show. Think of this as our annual review. What do you like about the show? What could we improve on? If you want to contribute, visit the link in our show notes to fill out the survey and help us make a better show for you.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Lightspeed. I'm your host, Jack Kubanek, alongside Mert Mumtaz, the Grinch who's withholding your Pengu airdrops. Mert, how's it going, man?
Great. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty well myself. I'm curious to get the status report on Pengu and everything. Was that a particularly hellish airdrop day? I feel like everyone in crypto was trying to access that one.
Yeah, it was chaotic, to say the least. The source of chaos is that it was confusing for most people. So when somebody connects to a wallet and then, let's say, either can't connect or when they send something, nothing happens. The problem is people just blame it on Solana. And in this case, there were many code errors that had nothing to do with Solana. So like a Web2 API going down, the wallet connector not having support for anything except for Phantom, not using specific dev practices on Solana that everybody uses. And that's probably mostly an education problem or just coming over from EVM. But we got them sorted. Now it seems to be going pretty good.
Yeah. Per the airdrop checker, I am a sole OG. I don't know if I would necessarily label myself as such, but I got like a $50 airdrop, which was pretty nice. I haven't really gotten any airdrops before. I don't really do the whole farming thing, so that was fun.
You
it also was
stake with Helios?
I don't, Mert. I don't.
Okay, because that's if you stake with Helios or hold 8 Sol, you would have qualified for OG as well. And so if you're watching this and you stake with Helios in any fashion, you have an airdrop. Go check it out.
I actually need to tell a friend from college. I've actually never told you this, Mert, but I saw him when I was back visiting school, and he was like, dude, I'm going to like sell my ETH and get Sol. And I was like, okay, here's what you're going to do. You're going to like, don't do it on Coinbase. Like you're going to want to move it to a wallet. We got him all set up. And then he was like, oh, it looks like Helios has the best yield on stake. And so he staked with Helios. So nice. I converted one person over to your side, but I actually totally forgot about him. I'll have to tell him to go get his Helios airdrop.
Yes, that'll be a good crypto experience.
Exactly. But look, we do a lot of roundups on this show. They're always a good time. And today we have a very special roundup to bring you all. We're doing like a roundup for 2024, a bit of a Solana year in review. Going to talk about some of the biggest stories that happened this year during what was a just pretty bullish year for Solana, price-wise, activity-wise, that kind of thing. And then maybe give some predictions as far as where we think things are headed into 2025. This may go out shortly after we record it just because of how the holiday scheduling stuff is all going to work. So if, I don't know, Trump makes a national Solana reserve after we record this, sorry, it's not going to be in the episode. But yeah, with that, let's kind of hop into it. And I guess maybe a place to start, Mert, is if you put yourself in your own shoes a year ago today, December of 2023, I believe the Jito airdrop had just gone off. DeFi volume is surging. People are trading bonk. There's this sense that like, okay, in all of the crypto media, there's this sense of like, Solana's kind of on its comeback arc a little bit. I guess in the years since, how have things played out similarly or differently to how you would have expected? When you were sitting here a year ago today, DeFi airdrops are around the corner. People are starting to see a Sol resurgence, and now where we sit today.
I don't quite remember if the meme coins had taken off to the extent that they have today at that point. I'm unsure when Pump.Fun actually released. Do you know?
Pump.Fun got big like March, April-ish. Because there was also that like meme coin pre-sale era, if you remember that, which produced some fun moments, like the dev that burned the pre-sale funds and that kind of thing. But I think a year ago it was Bonk was big, and then there was like all of these airdrops. So Jupiter was about to do an airdrop. Jito had just done its own airdrop.
I would say we certainly had a good year if you look at it from the outside in, or as compared to other chains, let's say, in terms of obviously all metrics, TPS, but also TVL, volume, fees, all the fundamentals, even price action. I would say, not to be a downer, but I think we kind of dropped the ball in many different places. So, for example, when transactions started getting super congested on the chain for, let's say, a month or 2 months, that was a big loss of momentum, where obviously we learned a lot of lessons and implemented new systems that are better. But I wonder what would have happened if that didn't occur. And I also believe we should have been much faster to raise block limits and have more block space. And also with Helios, I believe we could have released more products and helped the developer experience a bit more. So probably my favorite part of the year was simply Breakpoint, and seeing people and seeing the energy and seeing the focus on products and apps. That was great. The fundamentals were good, but yeah, my take on this is probably going to be different for most people, where I actually think we should have been up 10x higher than this, and it just comes down to execution. And hopefully next year we learn some of these lessons and have more urgency.
So bad year for Solana in Mert's view.
I think it could have been much better.
Yeah. I mean, I appreciate the candor. That's what Lightspeed brings, I actually, this is a quick aside, but I was doing some research for the podcast yesterday, and I found like a Cardano bait account had gone viral on Cardano Twitter for clipping a Lightspeed episode with Matt Siegel from Van Eck, where he's talking about everything wrong with Solana. And he's like, look at Matthew Siegel laying out all the issues with Solana. And I was like, dude, this was on a Solana podcast. I was a little proud of that, actually. I felt like that was a cool, like if you're going viral on like other ecosystems Twitter for criticizing the ecosystem you cover, it's like a good thing, Good to call balls and strikes.
Yeah, I tend to go pretty viral in Cardano and Algorand circles quite frequently. It's very fascinating.
You're a joke in their inner circles, Mert. That's what I hear.
Hopefully.
Chaos Labs, the leading on-chain risk management firm, recently launched its new flagship Oracle product, Edge, which delivers integrated, high-precision risk and price data for any on-chain application with a market. Edge emerged from stealth after 2 months, securing Jupiter, the top swap platform on Solana, already securing $30 billion in volume and more than 60% of all Solana perps volume. Edge is comprised of three components: price, risk, and proofs. It delivers high-precision price data with an integrated risk engine powered by Chaos's advanced outlier and anomaly detection algorithm. It automates delivery of real-time parameter adjustments on-chain based on current market conditions, and it enables the secure on-chain delivery of custom data points, including reserve attestations delivered via ZKPs. Most recently, Wintermute announced its selection of the Edge Proofs Oracle for Outcome Market, its new smart contract-based election prediction market tool. Thank you to Chaos Labs for making this episode possible. Everybody knows there's a massive shortage of top senior marketers in crypto, and teams are constantly struggling to get their go-to-market done right. Renaud Partners is the premier go-to-market advisory firm for early-stage crypto teams. They help top founders tell their stories better and build great non-technical teams. They advise founders on all things marketing, tight brand positioning, community building, social media, and building A+ internal teams. They work with some of the top projects across Solana, Monad, Ton, Base, and others. Renaud Partners has built the most elite network of native crypto marketers globally. They create custom expert teams to support founders with transformative strategy work. Some of the best founders, VC firms, and ecosystem leaders in the business trust Renaud Partners to help their teams expedite their marketing success and catalyze their growth. If you're a founder or a VC looking for support for your teams, I highly recommend connecting with them. You can learn more at renaudpartners.com. Celebrating 10 years of innovation, Ledger remains the most secure hardware wallet for your Solana and logins, trusted by 7 million users and securing 20% of the world's digital assets. In recent years, Ledger has built a robust ecosystem of products and services, making digital ownership more secure and accessible to everyone. Ledger's newest devices, Ledger Stacks and Ledger Flex, feature the world's first secure touchscreens, making it easier and safer to manage your Solana transactions and coins. With Ledger Live, you can seamlessly and securely manage and stake your SOL. Alongside Ledger Stacks and Ledger Flex, Ledger introduced the Ledger Security Key app, a safer alternative to traditional passwords, enhancing your overall digital security. Thank you to Ledger for making today's episode possible. So you brought up some of the congestion issues. There also was chain downtime in February, like an outage that lasted a few hours. And that was before I was actually covering Solana. That was before we launched the Lightspeed newsletter. So walk me through that, because I feel like some of the Solana liveness issues, downtime, is a recurring narrative or critique that people will bring up. So, I mean, what happened there? What was it like as someone who's maybe in some of the kind of situation room stuff? What was your memory of that?
Yeah. Well, the context or the setting was that Totally kept saying this thing where we'll remove the beta tag from mainnet beta once there's a year with no full outages, 365 days. And I believe this was, I don't remember the exact number, but something like 350 days we had no outages. And then right before we hit the year mark, we had an outage. And the annoying part was the outage had nothing to do with chain performance or anything like this. It was, so before in 2021 or 2022, when the chain would go down, it would be simply due to spam and a lot of activity, let's say, and DDoS attacks, things like this. And since the changes had went live to fix those issues, we hadn't had any outages due to spam, and we still haven't. And so the unfortunate part of this outage was that it was simply due to, it was a known bug which was already caught in a testing environment. And I believe it just wasn't prioritized properly to ship the mainnet. And it just got triggered. It was a DevOps issue basically in February. And the unfortunate part was it was avoidable. We already knew the fix. We knew that it could happen, and it had nothing to do with any other outages. And it was, so that wasn't fun. But if you take that one out, then before that, it was roughly a year before another Solana outage. And then now it's also been basically almost another year. So you can basically say 0 outages related to performance in the past 2 years, and then 1 due to a poor DevOps practice, which should have been mitigated since.
How much, like, because you've predicted a few shows ago that you think there'll be more downtime in the near future as things like FireDancer come online and that sort of thing. How much do you think those liveness issues matter as far as investors, as far as developers thinking of building on Solana? Like, how big of a deal is it when the chain goes down?
I believe the chain going down on its own is a big deal, but the full picture is generally painted around the externalities that it causes. So if it goes down and there are reports of millions lost in lost liquidations or different types of attacks, or which also depends on the duration of the outage, right? If it's an outage for 30 minutes, that's quite different than an outage for 2 days. And so it would depend on those factors. I would say a short outage with no externalities or attacks, so an isolated incident, for example, is bad, but it's generally not too hard to recover from, provided that the postmortem and everything around the incident is handled properly and we know the exact cause, it makes sense, all these things, and it's not a fundamental flaw. So and the other thing is, for example, the bigger you get, the more you have to lose from an outage. So one of the reasons why Ethereum ships slowly, especially compared to Solana, is because they have much more value at stake and they're a much older asset and chain and ecosystem. And so if they were to go down, it would be much worse for them than it would be for Solana. But then, for example, it would be much less worse for something like Sui to go down than for Solana to go down, because again, there's less activity on Sui and there's less money at stake. So as you get bigger, you have to become somewhat more risk averse in certain cases. So I think it is a big deal, especially as we try to make an institutional push for getting more serious teams and assets and ETFs and whatnot for Solana. That keeps increasing the stakes. So it would be pretty bad. That being said, I think it will happen and we will just have to go through it.
Yeah, that was the institution's point, is kind of my thought as well. Even just thinking back to John Charbonneau's Ethereum's North Star piece, when he talks about Ethereum could try to win narratively by saying this is the world computer. This is where serious smart contract business gets done. And if Solana keeps having liveness issues, maybe it becomes less appealing to, institutional actors who are going to be very risk averse. And even if funds aren't compromised or anything like that with a liveness issue, it's potentially, I guess, a risk vector for those institutions. So I think along those lines is maybe where it comes to matter most.
Yeah, it's a speculative asset fundamentally. And so if it's a speculative asset and goes down, you better bet that every single person on earth who hates Solana or just has bags that are not Solana will also take it out of proportion. So that'll also be a thing. It's an adversarial environment. So let's say it goes down for 30 minutes, then people will make up stories about all sorts of things. And yeah, so the important part is funds won't be at risk. And so, for example, that's why I store all my funds on Solana, because even though there might be another outage in the future, that will not affect the funds. But if you're running something like a lending protocol, that becomes scary.
Speaking of more chain issues that Solana saw this year, early April, or releases as part of the Coliseum Solana Hackathon. It's like a proof of work mining thing on Solana. You also are starting to see the beginnings of the meme coin craze that really came to dominate the entire year. And Solana briefly has a lot of issues with landing user transactions. The chain becomes very difficult for people to use and get transactions to land on the chain. And this actually was when I first became aware of you, Mert. Like I'd heard of you because you were co-hosting a Blockworks podcast, but I started seeing you on Twitter because you were doing a lot of like what exactly is happening explainers that were very helpful at the time. But yeah, what was your experience during that whole I don't know, week or so that things got really bad?
Yeah, this was probably the most avoidable thing of the year that I think would have made the biggest difference, which is we had started hearing early reports of this a while ago, since we're the leading provider of RPCs. And the idea of Stakeway QoS was floated around before this, but people thought it was already implemented properly, but it wasn't. And then at the time, there were debates around adding a base fee to Solana. There were debates around failed transactions, or reverted transactions, as EVM calls them. And there were all sorts of these parallel conversations. And okay, well, are the fees really working? I believe Eugene at the time wrote something about how the fee markets don't actually work, and it's random, and stochastic is the better word. And a few months before this, I had basically looked into this a little bit. And at the time, we were working with Eclipse, which is the SVML2. And they had a similar, one of their customers was a DEX, who I won't name, had a similar or a related question around, okay, what happens when the sequencer gets overwhelmed? How does the transaction get prioritized? Like, what drops and what doesn't drop? And at the time, I was thinking, wait a minute, if this doesn't work here, then it probably won't work on Solana. But I'm not sure if it actually works on Solana, because it's much harder to test a huge network. And so I told my CTO, I said, you know what? We should make a fee API right now to actually assess the effectiveness of fees and see and get this data. And also start sending or looking into how to send transactions better. And so we did that. And then or started picking up a little bit more, and people started reporting failed transactions. But the reason this was confusing is because failed transactions is an overloaded term. It can either mean drop transactions or transactions that actually made it on chain and then reverted, which is a normal thing in blockchains. And obviously, you don't have the data on which transactions get dropped because they don't make it to the blockchain. And so it's a very skewed picture. And so then Anatoly said something like, use RPCs who have Stakeway QoS enabled. And then I talked to him and I said, this doesn't work. I'm not sure why you're tweeting this. And it started making everybody else more confused. And then as we kept working around this, there was another RPC provider who's a multi-chain RPC provider who I'm not going to name. They started, so we had found an exploit in the Solana RPC code a few weeks before this. And basically what it allowed was you can spam the network to basically crowd out everybody else using the network to land only your transactions. And so that was a big bug. And we obviously didn't want to exploit it because that would ruin the Solana experience. And we were trying to work with different teams to patch it. This RPC team, which I'm not going to name again, did not care. In fact, they tweeted about it. They said, oh, we found something. So I was like, what the fuck is that? Like, you're just bragging about that. That's kind of weird. And then the actor who's now sandwiching people had already started exploiting this as well. So there were multiple attacks on the network while Toly was tweeting about stuff that doesn't make sense. And we had found that the Stakeway QoS thing doesn't actually work properly, or the fee markets don't work properly. And so all these things had to be fixed at the same time while the RPC providers provided a different experience. And so it was a whole shit show of different things. But luckily, since I had told Liam, my CTO, that I predict something like this might happen a few months earlier, we were super quick. And then we also spun up a validator and then became number one very fast. And so we were able to help mitigate the effect of how bad that system was. That being said, it's still not fully perfect today. So you saw in the Pengu claim that some of the transactions still weren't perfect, and so there's still work there to be done. But I believe that was the biggest blunder of the year. Although there's certainly something to be said about how quickly it was fixed or mitigated for such a large system.
So who does this fall on then? Because both with this and some other things you spoke about it at the top of the episode, like you're kind of saying there are things that Solana could have done better. There are issues like this that could have been avoided. So, I mean, where does the buck stop? Like who's responsible for making sure that if you notice that there's a, looming transaction landing crisis, that you should go ahead and treat it more urgently?
Well, fundamentally, it's on. I don't think there's a single responsible party, because if there were a single responsible party, then it would be a centralization vector, of course. But I would say it's a mix of the core teams that maintain the validator client and the RPC client, which are same today, but that won't always be the case. And then also people who obviously have an interest in the developer experience of the network. So Helios, Anza, Jito, and others, who I would say it's a combination of all of those. And I think we could have done a much better job of that. So, but then at the same time, you would argue that these are small startups that are also trying to work on other things, such as reading data from the blockchain and avoiding future outages. And so everybody has 1,000 priorities at once. And then it becomes, who can take the lead and articulate, this is the problem, this is why we need to all focus on fixing it and all this. And we did do that, for what it's worth. So for when the Jupiter airdrop went live, for example, we were able to unify as an ecosystem, us, Triton, Jito, Anza, and that was a huge airdrop and actually fix it. But it takes a village.
Yeah. It feels like Anza's been a lot busier lately too, like November, December. They created an invalidation team or something like that. That's, I think, supposed to do this kind of thing and just see where stuff breaks. They just announced that they're kind of working on implementing slashing to the Solana core protocol. Like, I just feel like I've seen more Anza headlines in the past couple weeks than I had all year.
Yes. Yeah. And then they set up a research team.
Yeah.
And they hired Maxi Riznik. And so they're doing good. So I talk to Toli pretty frequently, and I tell them pretty frequently, like, dude, get to work. Like, save my bags, help push the network. And to their credit, Anza is extremely competent and full of really smart people, and they ship, but obviously they have limitations, and it's a decentralized network, and so they can't see everything, but will come with time.
One thing I wanted to touch on is just the price action, because that really does drive, sort of in this circular way, the perceived success and also maybe the real success of an ecosystem as number go up. And Solana had a year in which it kind of improbably just hit an all-time high. It crossed, I think it hit $263. That was not something I certainly saw coming. I have a take here, and then I guess I'll get your take. I know we price is only so interesting, but I think my take is the unsung hero of Solana this year is Pantera Capital, because if you look at the Sol asset and why it cratered to $9 or whatever it was largely because the market essentially underpriced Sol based on the risk that FTX was creating. So FTX, when it went defunct, had all these Sol tokens. It was seen as, when the estate enters bankruptcy proceedings, it's going to have to maybe dump all of these tokens onto the market. It feels like, by the way, this is always a thing that the market freaks out about and like doesn't become too much of an issue. Like Mt. Gox with Bitcoin is a similar example. But when the FTX estate starts selling Solana, Pantera Capital, the crypto asset manager, they do venture, that kind of thing, raises a fund to buy a bunch of Sol tokens way below market value at like $63 or something, which they're up huge on that. But they bought, I believe, like billions worth in Solana at a lower price point, but not in a way that they were going to immediately dump it on the market and cash out into fiat. It was very telegraphed. Everyone knew that the deal was coming, and the market kind of absorbed the FTX selling, and the price went up a lot. And I think the fact, like, we talked about this when we had Sol Jakey and Solana Steve on the pod, but part of Solana's narrative that drives a lot of the culture, I guess, is like the comeback story. Like, your asset is down an unbelievable amount from its all-time high, and then to climb all the way back and hit another all-time high like 2 years later is really remarkable. And a lot of that is because there was such a freak out over FTX, and then Pantera and probably other funds buying and not dumping Sol, I think, is what allowed the price to reach the level it got to.
Yeah, I believe Galaxy was involved as well, and obviously Solana Foundation and a few other VCs who had conviction, or liquid funds. I don't think they were all VCs per se. And yeah, so I guess that's directionally correct. I generally am pretty clueless about most of the price action stuff or macro or anything. All I knew at the time was I hadn't sold, and I was very shocked how the price was that low and how it wasn't rebounding up, because I was buying every day. I bought a lot at $8, and then my thought was, I'm very confused here. Why is it this low? Are people just blind? It makes no sense to me. But then I think one of the weird things about CT especially is obviously it's social, and like that's the whole draw of crypto Twitter. It's a social media thing, and it's very easy to panic when you see, oh, this trader guy who was right once said something bad about this, therefore am I wrong? And so you start doubting yourself and getting emotional about all your theses and all this stuff. And some people have group chats to kind of post funny memes to cope over this stuff, and that's actually valid. But for me, it was like, okay, well, we're building a business here, and we're going to keep building it, and that's going to take many years, 5, 10, 20 years. And so which is what I'm actually concerned about. And so if we do our jobs right and we're somewhat competent and we try our best, we will improve the shit out of this chain. And when that happens, and we're not the only one, of course, and when that happens, then it'll become very clear that the chain was undervalued and the price will take care of itself over time. That's how I looked at it. And even at the time, there were not many developers on Solana. There was a few hundred maybe, and they weren't using us. We had just gone live, and we were like, well, shit, we just got to keep shipping and find new market opportunities in Solana. And then now it's the fast growing developer ecosystem. And that was not an easy thing to predict. I thought it would take slightly longer. And now the next goal is having the most number of developers, period, not just the slope, but also the y-intercept.
I think it was a real aha moment for me when I realized, oh, the reason that Sol declined so much relative to every other crypto, essentially, post FTX, was that it was linked to FTX, and the market was pricing it based on that. And that risk ended up not being as big as some market participants thought. I want to talk meme coins. It feels like you need to get into that a little bit in a year in review episode. We talk about meme coins a lot on this show, so won't spend too much time on it. I guess the big story of the year is Pump.Fun, which grew remarkably to, hundreds of millions in dollars in revenue in its first year in existence. I think there was this interesting thing that you love to tweet about, Mert, which is other crypto ecosystems, I think, began with sort of a hold your nose at meme coins, and that's the unserious thing that's done on Solana. And now everyone kind of wants in on the meme coins game because I don't know. At the end of the day, money kind of talks, and meme coins have proven to be very lucrative. I think there's also just been a lot of fun meme coin moments. I try not to pay too much attention to all of them, but the one where Slurf burnt 10 million in pre-sale funds is one of my favorites. The Las Vegas Sphere does still not have the dog with hat on it. Ansem. We didn't forget about that. I was also remembering like the DJT meme coin that had Martin Shkreli involved. That was a really crazy. And then there was a poly market that resolved and all this controversy. That was a crazy little era here. So I don't know, kind of one of the biggest ecosystem trends this year. I don't know, Mert, do you have a take, a strong grasp on what it's all about?
Well, fundamentally, it's that one of crypto's biggest use cases is simply speculation. And the reason that's so is because obviously the assets can move heavily in price in very short time horizons, but also because the rails are more they're less permissioned, they're much easier. Anybody in the world can do it, and it's kind of like this giant MMORPG game where anybody in the world with a Google Chrome extension can join it. That's how I think of it. And it first started with ICOs and NFTs, and now it's meme coins. And NFTs, if you looked at the past cycle, they went from being rare art types of things to basically shit coins anyways, with Blur and Tensor and game tradifying that experience. So so Solana just turned out to be the place where you can actually do this stuff at scale. Because and one of the things that gets underlooked or is underrated is on Solana, to release a new token, you don't have to write a new contract, right? For EVM, it's actually every single new token is a new contract deployment. On Solana, there's already an existing contract on the chain, and all you do is call that contract, and then you just mint a new token. That's it. So people like to shit on Solana, as I've experienced quite a bit, but that part is very underrated. It's much easier. You don't need to know how to write smart contracts. You just call a JavaScript function or whatever code language. So, and then of course, Pump That Fun, they obviously identified some need that the market has, which is wanting to speculate on coins, launch those coins and all these things. And Bonk had already, and by the way, I think Bonk gets not enough credit, but Bonk had already shown that you can be an extremely successful coin by literally just creating the coin, putting a nice little animal on it, and then now it was much more. So Bonk is much more effective than any other meme coin that I've seen because they're an actual team and they work with different events and hackathons and all sorts of different things to actually help the ecosystem. For example, with the Saga phone, whereas other meme coins are basically just about, haha, we're funny, we're just going to reply guide every guy's tweet, which is also funny. Like I had like 3 coins about me. It was because Helios is about Helios go faster, and then it was like Helios go slower, and it was like a mentally handicapped person with like drool. There was like Elizabeth Warren ones, there was the election ones, the politicians. So the change just likes to have fun, and I think Pump gets a lot of undeserved hate for this. But I think they're a great team that simply built a product that the market wanted to use. Nobody was forcing people to use it. It's very hard to get anyone to use any of your stuff that you build. You'll understand this if you've ever built a startup or anything. So I think we'll see how long they last, because fundamentally what I found, one of my theses in crypto is the dopamine thesis, which is the reason this stuff keeps getting more ridiculous is that when you're already up 5,000x and you're already making $1,000 per day, the amount of dopamine that you need to sustain that keeps needing to increase. Same with like nicotine, right? If you just have 1 nicotine pouch, okay, well, tomorrow you need 2 and then 3, and then it's kind of this weird biological cycle. It's the same with crypto, where you just don't feel anything anymore, right? Like Bitcoin hits 100 and then you're like, okay, sure. Now we need 200. Now we need the entire government in the world to adopt this. Okay, now we need to go to 1 million. And so it just kind of keeps happening. And the only way around that really is to find some other sort of meaning to focus on, which is easy for startup types because you're on a mission to build a company. But if you're a trader, then it becomes the rotator meme where you're like, okay, what do I rotate into next? How do I make even more money and whatnot? Which I believe is where most of the shenanigans come from.
Yeah, there's different schools of thought on it. I think I've saw a Meow tweet once that like porn going on the internet is what caused a lot of the early internet capacity to increase because there was so much demand for like video streaming. And now there's obviously many more things you can do with the internet and a lot of like serious uses, quote unquote, that people have for it. And he sort of said meme coins are like porn in that way. Like it's an unserious thing that is causing Solana to have to improve very quickly in anticipation of more serious use cases coming on chain. Now, a critic might say, like, well, show me where the serious use cases in question are, because like meme coins do just dominate activity in DeFi currently and things like that. But I do think that as far as like a pump.fun fall off, show me the data. I don't think it's going to happen soon. They kind of have the first mover advantage, and it's been, love it or hate it, a really incredible business that did kind of innovate and create a new product that the market clearly wanted.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually quite simple. It's if you accept the premise that the way to get better at things is with practice, which I'm not sure anybody would debate, right? Anything, not crypto, anything in the world, you need to practice. And if you accept that premise, then I don't care what you think about meme coins, but you must acknowledge that with that much activity, sustained activity, always causing a bunch of different problems and always being causing the need to increase bandwidth, for example, that just leads Solana to keep improving. And so if you say something like, well, there's no serious use cases, okay, well, that's an indictment on crypto, right? Solana itself cannot invent use cases. That is founders that do that. And then they pick the infrastructure platform to build on. And so if Solana is the most battle tested over time, in which it's not, by the way, I think it's on par with Ethereum because Ethereum has been around for very long, right? So when some of these new L1s or L2s come along and they're like, well, yeah, we're going to be better than Solana, it's like, that's because you haven't been punched in the face yet, right? What's going to happen when you get punched in the face from this activity? Are you going to be able to handle it? Because then you're just basically, let's say an investor, you're saying, okay, I believe they will get around this. They will be able to survive this. But it's like, that's a very risky bet to make. And so I think this meme coin stuff will position Solana to be the most scalable infrastructure going forward.
Mm-hmm. So we spoke about the unserious. Now let's talk about the more established. One, I guess, there were a couple interesting news cycles this year with Solana that I think didn't lead to as much as you might have expected. So both Stripe and PayPal, and maybe one other that I'm forgetting, sort of had these Solana integrations this year. So Stripe began accepting Solana payments. PayPal launched its PYUSD stablecoin on Solana. And I don't know, maybe it's like the dopamine brain that you're referencing, Mert, but I feel like not a lot came of this necessarily. Like, I don't know if there's PYUSD has a lot of organic adoption outside of liquidity incentives that I would assume were paid for by the Solana Foundation. It's not really rivaling like Circle or Tether at this point, at least the last I've looked at the numbers. So I don't know. What do you make of the year Solana had institutionally? Like, is this just fundamentally something that's going to take a long time, or why is it that some of these splashier announcements maybe didn't seem to fundamentally change how these institutions operate and how Solana is used?
I think it's just a matter of PMF, and PMF is very hard to get. So in the example of PayPal USD, for example, it's like, okay, why are you better than USDC, which is already on Solana, or why are you better than Tether or some other stablecoin? And or with Stripe, it's like, okay, why are you better? Like, why do people need this? And those are not easy problems. And I also don't think they're specific to Solana either. So my question, or everybody's question, should be, for the past 15 years, we started crypto as P2P cash, and nobody really uses it for that. Now that's changing, right? Stripe acquired Bridge and all this, and a bunch of it is due to regulation, of course. But I think a lot of uh, a lot of other things that it's due to is simply the product, right? If you're a merchant, why would you accept crypto, right? Do you have an actual need for? Not everybody has a need for it. If you're, for example, if I'm right, I already have a lot of Solana and I can convert to USDC, and maybe I don't want to do off ramp, and so I want to pay for this. But why does the merchant want to accept it? Well, the merchant want to accept it because they're losing potential business, or they're not realizing their full revenue potential because they're not accepting it. So like, it's a chicken and egg problem where there's the merchants involved, there's the transactors involved, there's a regulation and all these things. And simply just saying, well, we're going to support this chain does basically nothing towards that. What it does, which is the, let's say the Twitter part, is it shows to the world that these people are thinking about these solutions or problems. And when they do think about them, they do think about Solana, which is to say that it captures mindshare. And so that's the actual part that's important, but or at least half the part that's important. And then in terms of the institutional stuff, I wrote a tweet about this during Breakpoint. So Franklin Templeton is very interested in the chain. I've talked with them. I believe they're actually a watcher of the podcast too. So hello, if you're watching. Same with Van Eck. I mean, they've been on this podcast twice or three times, twice. And there's 5 Solana ETFs filed. David Sachs, who's now the czar of AI and crypto, he's an early Solana investor and a multi-coin LP. So in terms of institutional, the way I think about it, and this might offend some people, is they are good for when there's a trend and then they exist to scale that trend's momentum, but they don't create anything new in general. The people who create the new things are the weird dudes or girls that are in a garage, right? Like Polymarket Shane. If you saw some of his posts, he's like in his washroom in his office, just coding away. Those are the people who create the new things. And then the institutionals, right? So MYT and stuff starts covering it after the fact. But fundamentally, institutions don't create, they scale. And I think we're in a phase where we need to create much more. And then with the new regulatory apparatus, we can scale some of these payments and ETFs and traditional instruments. So that's how I think of it.
I think that's a good take. Payments is one I've been interested in just because I think there are obvious ways if you can commoditize certain parts of the stack, like on an off ramp from fiat, and that goes to zero. Like, there's obvious ways that things like money transfer or internet payments or things are like improved by Solana very clearly. And I do think, like you said, there's this discoverability issue where like Solana Pay has a Shopify Pay plugin, but there's no way for me to aggregate which merchants are going to accept my Solana USDC or whatever. So I don't know, like I can't know in advance which merchants I should shop with. So, you also just, the credit card industry is incredibly strong. They have these huge sprawling partnerships with airlines and Amazon and all these places that you can spend your points or whatever. So there's like systematic kind of barriers to some of this stuff. But I do like what you said. Like, the institutions are not the ones that are leading the innovation. They're the ones that can acquire you and then scale it up a bunch. So it's maybe a lagging indicator. This also,
yeah, and also
yeah.
people just don't ask the question enough. Like, what problem is this solving? Right? There's the biggest problem in crypto always has been we have a piece of tech, and now we're going to figure out how to sell it. Versus there's a problem, we're going to solve that problem, and crypto makes it better. In the case of credit cards, for example, crypto is worse than credit cards in many ways. That's just a fact. Like, it's first of all, it's not private in most cases, and the things that are private don't really scale today. Although there are things coming out to scale it, and then it's like, well, people don't take it, and then if people do take it, what are they going to do with it? They probably have to off ramp it, and so it starts making the experience much worse. And so there needs to be something like, like people need to start getting paid in crypto. And it's like, okay, why do they want to get paid in crypto? Well, perhaps it's a global team, perhaps a remote team, and they don't want to do all these weird jurisdictions and legal setups. And maybe is that enough of a reason, right? So I think Stripe just released something with a team called Remote for paying people in
Yeah,
stablecoins.
that was cool. I saw that. Didn't get a lot of coverage.
Yeah, so that didn't get coverage, and so that kind of tells you kind of the problem, which is that so that actually solves a problem, but it doesn't necessarily do anything to the price or the social thing or buzz. And I think with Polymarket is a good example because it actually solves a problem, but also incorporates crypto's unique aspects of like speculation, but also permissionlessness and global access, and like finding truth in markets. So that's like a really good example. Um, and so the payments thing I think is going to be kind of like as a rough example, the microprocessor shift in the internet from back in the day, where it takes roughly 8 to 10 years to actually start adding these systems and seeing them work and make everybody realize, because it's fundamentally an education problem, why it would be better.
We've gone a little bit into where I do want to conclude this episode, which is okay, there's your 2024 in review. Now let's look ahead a little bit to 2025. And to tie this into the discussion we were just having, one question I wanted to bring up here, Mert, is okay, like we know meme coins have a lot of product market fit and a lot of use on Solana currently. What in 2025 do you think will emerge as the best non-meme coin use case? So things like DPIN, payments, gaming, social, real world assets, AI agents, although those are kind of meme coins right now. Phone apps, I guess, with the Solana Seeker. Like with all this other stuff that exists, what are what do you think is most primed to kind of have a breakout year in 2025?
I think social fi, and I think I always say this basically, but
Every
I,
time,
I
every time.
yeah, I do think it's still the most interesting, but also most conducive to growth thing that I've seen. So, like, social media probably has the highest PMF of any startup or crypto, or not crypto, any technology really, right? Like, what do? You go on Instagram, you go on Twitter, you go on whatever, Snapchat, TikTok. Uh, what do you, or like, it's social is the most lindy thing I think that humans have. Like, humans are social animals, and if there's a way to use crypto, which is also deeply social, but also start to make it a bit more fun, a bit more interesting, but also a bit more interactive, where I really like, for example, uh, I like Kato. I don't know how to pronounce that.
Yeah.
What they've done, where they're like using SocialFi for data insights, and then also kind of financializing that, but not in such a way that you have to pay to play. The social part or the finance part of that is not really a barrier, and I think that's gonna be the biggest. I mean, even AI agents, those are fundamentally social fi, right? Like the agents, they are social. We like them because, or people look at them because they tweet or they reply guy or they're funny or they give analysis or something. There's a social element to it. And so I think that social fi is going to be the biggest That being said, what I hope happens is that there emerges a new use case that we just didn't think of, right? I think that would be the best case, right? I work on RPCs, man. I'm not necessarily the brightest product mind. I know how to operate and execute, but I don't know how to come up with new stuff. But I don't have to, right? If we can make crypto this exciting place for entrepreneurs with founder support, good VC funding, good regulatory environment, such that crazy people just come in and start shit, try shit, and then come up with something that just we didn't think would have made sense. That's fundamentally going to be the best option, best outcome. And that's what I hope for.
I don't know if I want to allow you to claim AI agents as social FIMERT, because you're going to come on here and say that you were right when AI agents take off. But I don't know, man. I don't know if I can give you that one.
I think AI agents will die off for its worth. I think by next year they won't be as big a deal as they are today, personally, because, well, I don't think I need to say because, but like, I think there's certainly, first of all, I don't even think it's mostly AIs that are operating these AI agents, which I'm not sure why people aren't talking about more. Like, there's a lot of these things that are just humans and they just say they're AIs. And people are doing it because they think it'll be like a trend. They'll be like, oh, AI agents will be hot. And so that's why it's not due to some fundamental need. So I'll give you that as a prediction that I think AI agents won't be a thing by the end of 2025.
Okay, I'm going to go opposite direction. I can't be a coward and not give a prediction here. So I'm going to say that I think AI agents are going to be the thing in 2025 that's really hot. I just think that VCs that I talk to are really, really going all in on this space. I think is currently constructed, they're not that interesting, but there's a very like left curve case you can make here, which is that ChatGPT is kind of magical tech that struggles to justify how much money it costs to run. It doesn't like OpenAI loses tons of money currently, and meme coins and speculation are a form of financialization that's attached to AI, so it's kind of solving a problem there, I guess you could argue. And I do think that there are going to come to be more interesting uses for AI agents. So like Parallel Colony is a crypto game. They built like an NFT card game, but they're building this game called Colony where you talk to AI agents and kind of do like civilizations style gaming stuff. And so stuff like that, that's not just like, oh, haha, unhinged Twitter bot, I think will come to be more of what succeeds.
Well,
but
isn't that just a game though? Like, isn't that GameFi? And then it has AI in it?
Yeah, I guess maybe I'm cheating as well, but it's like the AI agent tech. Yeah, I don't know. I think that's the other issue is what does an AI agent mean? But broadly defined, I think that's going to have a big 2025.
Yeah, I mean, I could be convinced that it could have a big year. I mean, it probably will have a big year because it just required, like, I mean, XRP surpassed Sol, so anything can happen in terms of belief.
Yeah.
I don't think it fundamentally does anything that interesting with crypto specifically. I could hopefully I'm wrong about that, and I hate being a cynic on any use case, but I just it seems more like a narrative than a thing that solves many things.
Well, yeah, we're gonna revisit this someday, Mert, and I'm gonna hopefully I'll have been right, but we'll see. I think it's also just gonna be an interesting year for, like, I'm personally very interested in payments, like I said. And for stuff like that, regulation has been such a roadblock. And also, I mean, if you want to be cynical, you could argue an excuse for why some of this stuff hasn't really taken off. And so now you have Paul Atkins coming in to lead the SEC. There's a belief that he'll be much easier on the crypto industry and tokens and things won't be treated like securities quite as much. And there might be clearer rules. And in a world like that, I think it could get really interesting. And I think some of this kind of waiting for Godot style, like, hey, the PMF for all this crypto stuff is right around the corner. It's like, okay, now is the time to execute. Now is the time to, like, there's no more regulatory issues. Like, you can really do this in the US. So I'm interested to see where things go in all sort of the Solana use cases in the next year for that reason.
With the only way to progress crypto, I think, is to relentlessly focus on founders and startups. And when you have an industry that hasn't found too much PMF in, other than stablecoins, then, or like, people will say there's PMF in certain other things, and that's like, governance or something. Like futurarchy, I think is super cool, for example. So prediction markets or markets in general maybe have PMF, but I think there can be, it's such a weird concept, crypto, where there's so many different blends of different disciplines that what you're going to need is sort of like a Manhattan Project or like a virtual Silicon Valley, where you have people experimenting with no barriers and no real time limit to just do shit, experiment with shit, and see what comes out.
Yeah. And that's why you're turning the UAE into the Silicon Valley of crypto, famously.
Oh yeah, that's hopefully we can do that. I'd like to make Solana that, and then hopefully there's Solana hub in UAE. But yeah,
the digital equivalent. Okay, last question for you, Mert. You started off the episode sort of saying that this year could have been much better for Solana. There were a lot of missed opportunities. So looking forward, 2025 for, I don't know, Solana ecosystem folks that are listening along, what do you think needs to happen to avoid some of the issues that came up in 2024 and to let Solana get to its potential, I guess, in this coming year?
I don't think there's anything revolutionary to change. This is generally a case of simple execution. So one of the things that I think is a risk to Solana that I don't think many people talk about is, so everybody knows Toli and Raj, and probably most people know me if you go on Solana Twitter, example, for reference. But then there are obviously people like Meow or Buffalo and Armani and stuff like this. But I think that, so like the amount of owners in the network needs to increase quite a bit. Or like when there's a problem, there needs to be many people who are like, okay, this is a problem. And they, first of all, they need to be really good communicators. They need to explain that. They need to be able to rally people, their own teams, but also the ecosystem and also other stakeholders. That's the only thing. That's the only way you can get things done in a decentralized anything, right? It's similar to a company where you're like a middle manager. You can't just say this is a problem. You need to convince leadership. You need to convince your own team. You need to convince, the exec VP from some other team. And it's the same in crypto or an ecosystem where you need to have this driver mentality, not a passenger. Don't rely on other people. Like, oh, like I'm not going to reply to this because Mert will probably reply to it anyways. Or like, oh, I'm not going to do this because Anza will solve it anyways. It's like, no, this is also your house. And so take ownership, whip up a plan, communicate it. The communication part is extremely important, and get it to the finish line, right? If you think there's a problem, if you think there will be a problem, talk about it and get something together. Get it done. It's permissionless. You can do things, okay? So that's the number one thing that I would like to see more of.
Yeah, ownership. You can just do stuff. Well, Mert, it's been a really fun episode. This has been a cool roundup, getting to kind of reminisce, look over the year, plan what's coming next. Listeners, thanks for tuning in. If I'm not sure exactly when this is coming out, but I hope you have a good Christmas, happy holidays, happy New Year, all that stuff. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next one.